Thanks for joining us on the Living After Faith podcast. I'm Rich Lyons. The lovely Deanna Joy is recovering from a traffic crash. She'll rejoin us as soon as we can get her mobile enough to fit in the studio. It's kind of tight in here. We're the official podcast of recoveringreligionist.com, and you can find us at livingafterfaith.com or on Facebook at facebook.com/livingafterfaith. We welcome your feedback, and you can find telephone numbers, email addresses, the whole contact thing at livingafterfaith.com. Give us a visit there. Let us know what you think about the program. Today's guest is Daniel, a close friend of mine who's recovering and helping others recover from their time spent in religion. Daniel, tell us about your church experience.
I was raised in a Catholic cult, of all places, if you can believe that. It was led by a charismatic leader who basically controlled a lot of the lives of many of the family members. I'll take one example, my younger brother. When my mom was pregnant with him, the family was really strapped on cash. And at one point, the church leader asked everyone for an extra bit of money because his son had to get bailed out of jail. So my dad, without hesitation, gave him the money. What that meant for the family, though, is that my mom didn't get the doctor visit that she needed while she was pregnant. And as a result, my brother and my mom almost died in delivery.
Now, how did you go from Catholic cult to Pentecostal church?
It was kind of a falling away because it doesn't take you very long, if you're a reasonably intelligent guy, I think. I'm a reasonably intelligent guy. I figured out that prayer doesn't actually work. And I learned pretty quickly on that religion was kind of bunk, but I kind of needed a way out. And that's what the Pentecostal church actually offered me. I had a job working as just a secular guy, just doing a 9-to-5 job at a church. And I ended up getting saved and grew to call that church my own. But after a while, the same doubts kept creeping back in, and after a while, I couldn't really call that my own either.
With the abusive nature of the Catholic church you were raised in, how long did you stay in that?
I was in that for a good majority of my life. That was up until maybe 6 years ago I was in that church. About 2 years after I left that, I ended up leaving the Pentecostal church as well, so it was kind of a short stint. It was kind of a way out for me. It's kind of an odd situation because according to the theology of the Catholic cult that I grew up in, because of my parents' prayers, all of their children, all of us, we were going to be some of the first people that were going to repopulate a new earth. There was going to be a new heaven and a new earth. God was going to recreate the world, and we were going to be part of it. So we were kind of guaranteed admission. So my dad was less harsh on us than he was on himself, because he felt that he sort of had to earn his way in, whereas we were just born into it. So a lot of the more abusive aspects didn't really happen to me. They happened to my oldest brother. I come from a pretty big family. But as my parents saw what it was doing to him, they kind of laid off a little bit on the rest of us. So by the time I was born, there wasn't a whole lot going on. There was some oddities, like I remember specifically after the Waco siege. I was in middle school at the time, and my parents made a point that I wasn't to show my religion. Like we would say grace before every meal, and when I was at school, I was expected to do that. It's an odd situation because I was also expected to hide that now. So I was supposed to say grace, but not show people that I was saying grace. So I remember specifically, faking like I was looking down so I can give myself the Father, Son, Holy Ghost, bless myself, say my grace in my head, and then I would oh, what's that? And look back down so I can duck under the table and bless myself again. It's really silly looking back on it, but that's the kind of gymnastics you have to do when you're put in a situation like that.
Let's talk about your time in Pentecost. What did you find there?
What I found there was more a social group that was kind of instantly accepting of me more than anything else. That's really what drew me in. And then the kind of religion followed after that. As I was working for the Pentecostal church, a group of friends of mine were hanging out one night, and we actually got attacked by a gang. Now, I wasn't directly involved. I wasn't one of the ones that were attacked. I was separated from the group by a few dozen feet, but I could still hear everything. So when you hear your friends getting beaten, and when you hear them being hurt, and you don't know if they're going to die that night, it's really traumatic, and that gave me a lot of PTSD. I was pretty close to one of the youth pastors of the church, and at that point it was really hard for me to be alone, because that was a psychological thing that I was going through, because I was alone then, and it hurt so bad that I didn't want to be alone at that time. So, I called him up late at night, and I went over to his house, and he basically said that I was looking for a spiritual awakening. And he led me through the sinner's prayer, and that's how I got saved.
That fear of being alone shows you were vulnerable, and that's exactly the person these groups like to target and who they like to look for. Someone who's vulnerable and someone they can bring into the fold, so to speak.
I really think that 80% of the people that are saved at churches are children of the members of the churches. I mean, if you're saving children, what does that say about the maturity of your theology? That most of the people that you're saving are kids, or the people that are vulnerable and put in situations where they might have their kids taken away from them, which I saw one time. There was a couple who were convicted of running a meth lab, and they got their children taken away, and they were in church trying to get saved. And it doesn't really surprise me looking back on it, because that's a really tough thing to go through.
But you weren't just casual. I mean, maybe you've kind of said it was just a way out, but even in your just a way out, you were pretty serious about your
I was serious about it. I mean, I was praying to God every night in my room, and going to church 2-3 times a week easily. I was going to all the youth events and everything. I mean, I was really into it. In a sense, I was kind of trying to make it work, because when I was with my parents, there were expectations of acts that I had to perform religiously to be seen as kind of an upstanding member of the family. That included praying every night with the family, knowing all the prayers and everything like that, and just kind of going through the motions. And after going through the motions for so long, it becomes automatic. And then you can kind of believe whatever you want. It's a little psychological stress, but you can kind of manage. After I left, I promised myself that I would never fake it again. So as I was going to this Pentecostal church, I wanted to make sure that what I was feeling was real, because otherwise I'd be going through the same motions again. So I was praying all the time. I was doing everything that a Christian should do to get closer to God. And I believed that I was growing closer to God.
You told me earlier about a time that you just couldn't go along with the group and what they were doing. Tell us about that.
It was about 10 o'clock at night, and I guess they wanted to do something. So they decided that they were going to go and drive down to the Planned Parenthood that was nearby, and they were going to stand outside and just pray. And even then, it didn't really jive with me. I mean, because when you pray, you're supposed to hide yourself, so you're not seen as the hypocrite. The guy that prays in his closet is more holy than the guy that prays where everyone can see him and everyone thinks he's holy. But also, there was something else, that this wasn't really what I believed. I mean, I see abortion as a bad thing, but I see it as something to be avoided, not made illegal. So it was one instance at the church. I mean, there were several, but that was one instance where my personal morality was actually in contradiction to what the church was believing at the time.
So from Catholic cult to Pentecostal church now, why did you leave?
There's no one grain that causes the avalanche, It's a combination of a lot of different things. But I'd say the biggest thing that made me leave was the way that prayer is portrayed. Prayer is portrayed as a way to get God to intercede on the events of man. And there was one elder at the church who said something that I thought was really profound. He said that prayer is not a means of effecting change, it's a means of self-edification. And I thought that was a beautiful concept, because it means you're not really praying for God to, heal someone's cat or whatever the prayer is. You're praying so that you become a better and more holy person. And then God will do what he wants. Yes or no, you can accept what it is, because you're growing as a person and you're just leaving it in God's hands. But that explanation was really at odds with every other way that the church was portraying prayer. The church was saying, if all of us join hands and we all believe, then this will happen in God's name, always in Jesus' name. And it just really struck me, because I've always had this kind of aversion to prayer. And I can trace it back to when I was, I would say 8 or 9. When you're a little kid, you lie to your parents. It's something that kids do. And what I did is I lied to my parents, and I told them that I was praying for a little Casio keyboard for Christmas. And a week later on Christmas, what's under the tree but a Casio keyboard, right? I hadn't been praying at all for this. But the little sticker, my parents used to put little stickers like from Santa, from the Virgin Mary, from Jesus, things like that, to put religion back into Christmas. And that one said from God. And I was like, really? I don't think it's really from God. I think you guys want me to think it's from God. And I mean, even at that young age, I was quick enough to catch on. And ever since then, prayer has been kind of a sticking point for me.
So tell how that changed things at the Pentecostal church.
It was kind of a gradual thing. For a while, I actually started feeling ill at the services because of the just overt displays of prayer and holiness that were going on. I stopped attending for a little while, maybe a month or two, and then went back for maybe a week, going to all the different services, because I wanted to make sure that what I was feeling wasn't just a fluke, like I was in a bad mood or something like that. I waited a while, gave myself a little time out, then came back, but my feelings hadn't changed. There was still Let's pray for these things to happen, And I started seeing the exact same features of my old Catholic faith. Things like a charismatic leader who people obey unquestioningly. Things like saying that things are God's will when things didn't go the way you thought they would. That was really tough for me to wrap my head around. Because really, you're just giving God credit for the wins and saying, well, it's God's will, God is mysterious for all the losses. So a combination of a lot of different things just physically repulsed me while I was sitting in service. And after that, I told a lot of my friends that I wasn't going to be going to church. And maybe a month or two after that, I told them I'm agnostic. I don't even know if there's a God at this point. And they tried the usual kind of psychological tricks to try and get me back in. Like, it'd be really nice to see you in heaven, because you're my bro and all these things, Looking back on it, it was pretty typical what they did.
When you finally made your exit, what happened then?
It wasn't as stark as I expected it to be. In fact, it wasn't even as stark when I left my parents' church, I was expecting complete disownment. That's what I'd prepared for mentally going into it. So you can imagine how nervous I was walking in with a note in my hand to my parents, because, I was a nervous speaker at the time, with a note in my hand, asking my parents to please read this because this is how I feel. This was the night that I was leaving and moving in across the street from the Pentecostal church. So I was expecting disownment, and my mom cried, my dad was really upset, but they still accepted me as their son. They loved me. And in a similar way, the same thing happened at the Pentecostal church. I'm still friends with quite a few of the people that I was close to at the church. However, the people that I only had the church in common with, nothing else in common with them, just we go to the same church, I don't really talk to them anymore. But I can't say I've really been shunned in any way. I don't feel shunned from many of the members, especially of the youth group who used to worship together, mainly because I just don't really talk to them anymore. I mean, if I had something in common with the person, if we shared a moment that wasn't completely centered on God, it's like, oh, you like doing this too? I like that too. Let's hang out. If we had something in common other than just we go to the same church, then yeah, we're still friends at this point.
My favorite question every podcast we do, how's your life now, Daniel?
Life now is actually pretty fantastic. I've got a great girlfriend. I have fun a lot of the time. And I can honestly say that I've finally become at peace with being a full atheist. Because for a while, when I was living with my parents, I considered myself an agnostic. Like, how can my parents really know that this is the truth? It's like they can't really know. Nobody can really know. So at this point, I've basically concluded that there's no God. I'm still open. I mean, if God showed up in front of me, I would have to decide whether he's a hallucination or whether he's real. So there's always the possibility that I could be convinced. But at this point, I've stopped looking for God. I think that's the best way to say this. I've just stopped looking. And I've heard some of the members of the church that I used to go to say that you should always keep looking. But at this point, I mean, if God really wants me back, then he'll give me a sign to push me back. But at this point, I'm done searching.
I don't believe it's possible anyone can prove that there is no God. But there comes a time when you look at the lack of evidence and you draw your own conclusion. And I think you've seen a whole lot of opportunity for evidence to be there, but you just haven't been able to find enough evidence to convince you that there is a God, and that's working for you.
Yeah, one of the reasons why I'm so happy right now is especially because I was raised in a Catholic cult. Because everything was so extreme. I hate to use the comparison, but it's like being raised by the Taliban, real extremists. I mean, the church that I grew up in was apocalyptic. They were expecting the end of the world. Now, when you grow up in a church like that, you either accept it or you just think it's bunk. And once you accept it as bunk, you start to see the same type of psychological tricks being portrayed everywhere, because it's laid out so clearly for you that this one guy is in charge and everybody listens to him. Once you see that as strongly as I've seen it growing up, it's very easy to see in many other situations. And that's one of the reasons why I left the Pentecostal church as well, as tamer though it was from my previous church.
You had a lot of pain in the process of leaving faith. Do you feel comfortable talking about that now?
It's not something that I bring up when I talk about my atheism, because it's still kind of close to home. I mean, my parents got divorced a little over a year ago because my mom just couldn't cope with the same situations that I was in, because she went through a lot more pain than I did, because she was the good Christian wife and she was absolutely subservient to my dad. And when you go through the situations that she went through, for example, the situation with my brother, it's hard to accept one person's point of view as being equal to God's point of view. So it's still a little tough for me to talk about because the divorce is so near. My family's split up quite a bit. I'm still not completely sure which side of the fence many of them fall on. But yeah, I mean, things are always getting better. I've become comfortable enough in my own skin as a full atheist, and I haven't really faced down death, but I understand that it's final. It's going to be the same after I'm dead as it was before I was born. It's just not there. And it's meaningless to try and imagine it because you won't be there. So at the same time, that's one of the reasons why it's so important to enjoy what you're doing. Because you only have the one life to live. And you can't spend it trusting what somebody else thinks of God, of life, of morality. These are things that you have to figure out for yourself. These aren't things that you can just lay on someone else and say, tell me how this works. So yeah, life for me is about having fun. It's about being the best person that I can be, the most moral person that I can be, and just being the best version of myself that I can imagine.
And that is great advice for every one of us. This is the Living After Faith podcast. We're the official podcast of RecoveringReligionist.com, and you can find us at livingafterfaith.com or Facebook at facebook.com/livingafterfaith. We welcome your feedback, and you can find phone numbers and all the stuff you need to contact us at the email address at livingafterfaith.com. For Living After Faith, I'm Rich Lyons. Come laugh with me.